This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. The holidays are over, the decorations are down, and suddenly everything feels a little empty. It's normal to feel the winter blues after the holiday excitement. January, February, and March are by far my least favorite months of the year. It's cold and dark, and I have to get some extra vitamin D on board. I also need to keep my regular scheduled appointments with my therapist. So if you're feeling that post-holiday funk, I definitely suggest you checking out BetterHelp because maybe it's time to talk. You might also be one of those people like me who makes New Year's resolutions and you get super motivated. So maybe you need someone behind you to hold you accountable and come up with a plan to meet your goals. BetterHelp is super convenient, totally online. You have a therapist right at your fingertips whenever you need them. So head over to betterhelp.com/wifeofcrime1 to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/wifeofcrime1 for 10% off your first month.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
This podcast is an unscripted, unedited conversation about true crime. We take the cases very seriously, but I don't take myself seriously at all, and neither should you. Welcome to Wife of Crime.
So, Russ, it's October, and I love a theme. We've been doing spooky cases every October for the last 5 years now. I love learning about the history of folklore, but sometimes folklore and legends are taken to the extreme. And when it comes to vampires, taking these legends too seriously can have grave outcomes. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Wife of Crime, a true crime podcast where I tell my husband, Russ, true crime stories and he reacts to them.
What's up, folks? It's Russ, a.k.a. The Profiler, a.k.a. Mr. Backyard.
Mr. Backyard?
Pause. I was thinking, because, you came in the house the other day, and you were like, Russ, where we went wrong is everyone's sits out front, and we always sit in the backyard.
Oh, okay. Russ is referring to our neighborhood. We have a lot of very friendly people that live in our neighborhood, and all of our neighbors hang out on their front porches with each other. But Russ always hangs out in the back.
And I didn't go wrong. I very strategically sit in the backyard because no one will see me. And in this neighborhood, people all walk up to you.
Yes, it's very friendly. A lot of very nice neighbors here.
In the words of the little viral girl, worry about yourself.
The little viral girl? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
She was cute.
And you know what I thought was funny, too?
What?
Someone wrote, it was either a review or they sent us something on Instagram where they thought I was an actual trained profiler. And then as the episodes go, like she was listening, she was like, wait a minute. She's like, she was upset when she found out I wasn't really a profiler.
That's right.
And like, I'm a self-taught profiler.
Yeah, like she really thought you were a profiler for real.
Yeah.
Oh, she was probably disappointed.
Well, I'm probably better than her favorite profiler, whoever that is.
Maybe. Well, speaking of profilers, apparently there's a new Hulu documentary about Ann Burgess, who was a nurse and profiler, and I cannot wait to watch it. She was like a consultant with the FBI, and she profiled a lot of serial killers. Like early on in the beginning, the term serial killer became a thing. So it's on Hulu, apparently. One of our listeners sent it to us, and I can't wait to watch it.
Since when did they start letting women become profilers?
Shut up, Russ.
And
there are a
nurses,
lot of women profilers.
I didn't
You're
know.
just trying to trigger me.
I didn't know that especially like a nurse.
I hate you. I love it because there are going to be random people who listen to this episode and they hear you say misogynistic shit like that or talk shit about nurses. And then they don't know your whole personality and
Yeah,
they
they
don't
don't
know
get it.
our dynamic and they're going to give us a 1-star review.
Well, like the person that said, if my husband spoke to me like that, he'd be dead or some shit.
yeah.
Because I think I told you shut up. But it was your turn to shut up.
Yeah. We tell each other to shut up all the time. Well, I really tried, guys. I really tried to convince him to watch the 5-part series, The Real Nightmare on Elm Street on Max. And we were about to do it. But then he saw previews for the new Zodiac Killer documentary that's coming out on Netflix on Wednesday. And he was actually into it. And so if Russ is going to be into true crime, I have to take advantage of it. So for True Crime and Chill this month, we are going to watch the new Zodiac Killer documentary. I think it's called Zodiac Speaks or something.
This is the Zodiac speaking. It comes out on Wednesday.
Yes.
So that's the same day this episode is supposed to come out, which is tomorrow.
Yeah. You're not supposed to tell people we're this last minute.
Or like,
We need to try to act professional. You don't need to know we're recording it this last minute.
nuh-uh, I'm an open book, baby. So I don't care. Like, everyone else could be all professional and have time. Sometimes we're just like, oh shit.
So our last True Crime and Chill, we had a lot of opinions. We watched Into the Fire. Me and Russ didn't agree on a lot of things.
I don't
Our
even remember which one
listeners-
that was.
Well, we're not going to get into it. It's the one about the mom who was searching for her adopted daughter.
Oh.
Okay, but we're not going to get into it because I want people to listen to the episode if they haven't heard it. And if you go to Patreon or Apple subscription, you can hear all of our True Crime and Chill episodes. We had a lot of opinions. The good thing about our podcast is that you and I disagree all the time. So we have a very wide listener base. We have people who agree with you. We have people who agree with me. And we have the freedom in our listener base, and especially the crime family, for people to call you out.
Yeah.
And I think it's really fun because they feel free and open to tell you that you're wrong or tell me that I'm wrong. And I just think it's a beautiful thing because in our world now, we can't do that without everyone hating each other.
I will.
But I know, but we've created an environment where people are allowed to disagree and allowed to voice the fact that they disagree. And no one gets pissed off. Like, it's all good. So I just think it's a really safe environment. And we
Hey,
had
you know what it is? Maybe it's an unsafe environment for everyone.
well, they had a really
Like anyone could get it.
True. Anyone can get it. We had a lot of opinions on that one. And we had a lot of opinions on the Teresita Basa case as well, because we have full-on non-believers and some skeptics and full-on believers in our listener base. So anyway, I just think it's so cool. I love the fact that we've created this community of people who can disagree and it's fine.
Yeah. And I didn't realize it was a community until recently. Someone was like, I love this community. I was like, oh, I guess we kind of are.
We had created a community. Look at us.
It's an cult.
You said you always wanted to have a cult.
Yeah, I'm the leader. So now
everyone's supposed to vote for you, so
I know. What if I become president?
Wow, imagine that.
What you got to do when you're president is they all act like know-it-alls. Sometimes you're gonna be like, I don't know, let's try this, see if it works.
Yeah, true.
Everyone goes, this is what I'm gonna do, and it's 100% gonna work. How you know you ain't do it yet?
True. Yeah. All right. Well, time for your jobs.
All right, folks. So part of the Patreon stuff is I will shout you out along with the merch and the episodes. There's a lot of episodes over there now if you run out of stuff to listen to here. So the people that join this week are Prithy. This one is interesting. Russ's wheelchair. So my wheelchair just joined. You motherfuckers. Jennifer, Casey, Corbin, Brenda, Becca, Autumn, Camille, Jenny Jazz, Kimberly, Steph, Caitlin, Ida, Reese's Cup,
Ooh.
Tanya, and Leland. So, cheers to you guys.
Cheers.
I don't know. I just always sings that. I don't know. I just find it a little bit awkward. So I also been pretty good at doing review of the week. So this week's review of the week is from Tay. I was going to say Tay. There's some corns in this house. 5 stars. Utterly obsessed with this podcast. I started listening from the most recent and worked my way back. I am currently in the 2021 era.
Oh.
You guys are the best. I find myself saying, Russ, let the woman talk out loud while listening whenever he interrupts Jess.
Mm-hmm.
Don't say, you're interrupting me. Jess, I love how you tell the story like you were really there while respecting the victims at the same time. Everyone needs a Russ in their life. Cheers.
Oh, nice.
So that's dope. So
I mean, you can relate because when you listen to our episodes, you tell yourself to shut up.
Today I was listening to one. I was like, Jesus Christ, shut up.
At least you can be self-aware.
But if you're going to have me sitting here for like an hour and a half, I have to talk. I can't just like sit here because if I use my phone, Jess gets mad at me and I get in trouble.
I do get mad if he's on his phone because it looks like you're not listening.
Sometimes I'm looking something
up. And then I
up.
think that my story is boring. So,
Or maybe I could be looking for something to add up because there is Russ, the researcher that works here too.
True. He does make an appearance once in a while.
Yeah, I do look stuff up as you're telling me. I'll look up like what the person looks like sometimes.
Okay.
I'll look up the score of a game sometimes. It's important information.
All right. So we're on a Halloween theme. I love Halloween time because I love themes. And Halloween is one of my favorite holidays. And I love spooky season. And it's just so much fun. So last week, we talked about the Teresita Basa case. And it was a case of a ghost who solved her own murder. And I was trying hard to convince Russ that ghosts do exist.
Yeah, but I called shenanigans, so that's it. It's fake.
So, yes, he didn't necessarily believe it, but you guys can go listen to that episode and see what you think. I'm going to ask you a question. Tell me the first thing that pops in your head when I say the word vampire.
What We Do in the Shadows.
I knew you were going to say that.
I love that show. It's so silly.
Yes, What We Do in the Shadows is literally one of the best shows ever.
Well,
it's so good.
The problem with women is they use the word literally, literally too much. Like I don't know if it's literally one of the best shows ever. If you were making a list, it wouldn't be it'd be.
No, but it's funny and it's an easy watch and it's a really interesting concept. Like vampires on a reality show living in Staten Island.
Yeah.
It is actually like the concept sounds so stupid, but when you watch it, I don't know, it's really funny.
You had to be there, folks.
Yeah, you got to watch it. It's so good. Vampires are one of the most enduring figures in both folklore and pop culture. Over the centuries, they have evolved from strictly being malevolent and violent beings to complex, romantic, sexy, and even funny characters. Their roots span across many cultures and periods, reflecting humanity's deepest fears and anxieties about death, disease, and the unknown. But vampire lore has, at times, been taken to dangerous extremes, leading to persecution, fear-driven rituals, extreme violence, and even murder.
And also the invention of Hot Topic store. And Spencer's not as much. They just sell dildos in the back.
Hot Topic, for sure. Vampire myths, when misinterpreted or used to justify violence, can have tragic, real-world consequences. So today, we are doing things a little different because it's almost Halloween. So I'm giving you a 3-for-1 special.
What? I got a game to watch in about an hour.
Well, I'm giving you a 3-for-1 special. I'm telling you 3 stories that show us the dangers of taking folklore and legends way too far. Are you ready?
Yep.
Did you like how I did that?
You're very singy today.
I am. Vampire-like creatures have been haunting our imaginations since the dawn of civilization. Literally, ancient civilizations all over the world had their own versions of the blood-sucking undead. But the Middle Ages in Europe is where these characters really started to take shape. Now, the medieval period was prime time for superstitions to run wild. Death was pretty much everyone's constant companion because of plagues, famine, and war. It wasn't exactly a golden age for good vibes.
Yeah, everybody was dirty and there was a lot of diseases.
Definitely.
And people died because they didn't know like these invisible germs can kill you.
Exactly. They didn't understand how disease was spread. And every time I think of the Middle Ages and we're talking about this, I keep thinking of Monty Python when he says, "Bring out your dead."
Yeah. I would just think of a lot of women with underarm hair.
Everyone probably smelled so bad. No one cleaned their ass. They all didn't brush their teeth. Like, everyone probably was so disgusting. That's why I can't watch those type of like period films from way back in the medieval times and take it seriously, because if someone's having sex, you know that they smelled so bad.
Except in what's that show with the dragon?
Oh, Game of Thrones.
In Game of Thrones, they looked pretty hot.
They did. Yeah, they did. That's true. So, of course, the idea of the dead rising from their graves to wreak havoc started catching on like wildfire. People started believing in revenants, which are corpses that crawl out of the grave and spread disease and death.
Zombies.
Fast forward to 1897, and these spooky stories laid the groundwork for what would become the most famous vampire tale of all time, Bram Stoker's Dracula. Part of Stoker's inspiration came from a real-life guy who was just as terrifying. His name was Vlad III, a 15th century prince who had a really dark hobby.
The Impaler.
Yes, Vlad the Impaler.
Vlad the Impaler. I want to suck your blood.
So I was listening to a podcast the other day about Vlad the Impaler, and they said that the forest around his castle had hundreds of bodies just dangling from stakes.
Wow. I think that's the only thing that might keep the neighbors from coming over too much.
Well, it's no wonder this guy inspired the legend of Dracula. So with Vlad's historical cruelty and the already thriving vampire myths, Count Dracula quickly became the blueprint for the modern vampire. But here's the thing. While we tend to think of vampires as like an Eastern European thing, cultures all around the world have their own versions of these undead creatures.
Oh, you know what the worst version of the vampire is?
What?
Twilight, that sparkly, skinny little bitch.
I'm going to get to that in a
Jeez
second.
Louise. And since Twilight, they killed the genre. No one makes any more vampire stuff.
That's not true. There's some new vampire movies coming out. We just watched a couple.
Well, I'm pretty sure that, yes, some have come out, but nothing that you could really remember.
We watched Abigail. That was a good one about the little girl vampire.
Oh, that was very recently, yeah. But that was dark. They had the sparkle dude, and nobody liked that.
Dracula hit the big screen in 1931, and vampires officially became horror movie icons. But then, something interesting happened. Vampires started to get kinda sexy.
Barf.
Anne Rice's Interview with a Vampire gave us vampires with feelings. And then Twilight, like you said, Twilight, went all in on the idea that vampires were romantic, misunderstood souls who could fall in love and sparkle in the sun.
Oh, my goodness.
But it didn't stop there. Shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and True Blood flipped the script even more, turning vampires into these marginalized figures just trying to fit into human society. Suddenly, vampires weren't just the bad guys. They were us, struggling with identity.
What's your favorite vampire movie?
Movie?
Or whatever, something vampire, something to watch.
Oh gosh, I love vampires.
Well,
I love vampires almost as much as I love witches.
Well, if you were going to watch one right now, only one,
okay,
what would you put on?
I would probably put on Oh, if I'm talking about a show, I'd probably put on What We Do in the Shadows because I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah, that's good. Me, what I think my favorite would be Blade.
Oh, yeah. Blade was good.
That's where I discovered Jessica Biel.
Oh, yeah. You love Jessica Biel. Suddenly, vampires weren't just the bad guys. They were us, struggling with identity, love, and existence. So why does vampire lore keep sticking around? It's because the vampire myth is like a shapeshifter, constantly evolving to match whatever fears or values we're wrestling with as a society. As long as we're freaked out by death and the unknown, you can bet vampires will be lurking in our stories, finding new ways to keep us up at night. The first case I have for you takes us to New Orleans. I'm obsessed with New Orleans. I have never been there, but it's on my bucket list, and I just know I will love visiting it. I just know I will. One of my favorite podcast episodes of all time that I've ever researched was the case of Madame Lalaurie.
Lalaurie. She was the torturer.
Yes, we covered that crazy bitch's case back in October of 2022. I talk a lot about the history of enslaved people in Louisiana, and today I'm telling you about a different piece of Louisiana history. New Orleans is a city steeped in mystery, voodoo, and some seriously spooky vampire lore.
And Mardi Gras.
Have you ever heard of the Casket Girls?
No.
Well, it's the early 1700s. New Orleans is hot, sweaty, mosquito-filled, and it's a swamp of a colony, barely hanging on by a thread. The French are doing everything they can to make it work, but there's one huge problem. The colony is packed with men. Literally, only dudes are there, only guys. Soldiers, trappers, adventurers, ex-cons, and prisoners were all sent from France to build this colony in this swampland.
That's where they probably got that crazy accent because it mixed with French in there or something,
Yeah,
right?
we talked about it in that episode I just said.
Yeah, it's a very interesting way to talk.
Basically, it's like a frat house in the middle of the bayou. And we all know what happens when there are too many men and not enough women. Chaos. It's a sausage fest.
I don't know. Men get along better with each other than women get along with each other.
Well, King Louis had to figure out a solution because he wanted a new French colony to be successful. So he's like, I know what we'll do. We'll ship over some young women to balance things out. Problem solved. So the French crown, with the help of the church, rounds up a bunch of girls and women, the youngest being 14 years old, mostly orphans or girls from poor families. And they offer them a one-way ticket to New Orleans. They're like, hey, you want to get married and start this new life in the new world? These ladies were known as the filles à la cassette.
What does that mean?
Casket girls.
Oh.
Because of these small chests that they carried with them.
Their
that
boobs?
No, chests, like wooden chests.
Oh, you meant like their small chests that they carried with them.
No, wooden chests, like crates that they carried with them. And it held all of their worldly possessions. So the girls arrive, and the local men are all watching. They're like ravishing dogs, waiting for these girls to get assigned to them. But the men are immediately like, wait a minute. These girls are pale, sickly looking. And when the hot sun hits their skin, they turn red and get blistered. Those aren't suitcases. They look like coffins. They must have brought vampires with them from France. Or maybe the girls are vampires themselves, bringing along their own wooden coffins to sleep in. So let me break this down for a second. These girls had just arrived after months at sea.
Oh yeah, so they're probably not a lot of nourishment on the ship.
They're packed like sardines on these ships, dealing with seasickness, terrible food, pirates, okay? The constant threat of disease. They arrive in New Orleans thinking that they'll be welcomed with open arms, only to be accused of being vampires or at the very least smuggling vampires in. So it's a pretty bad start for them. So rumor has it that the Casket Girls were brought to the Ursuline convent, to be housed and prepared for marriage. This old spooky convent still stands today, and it's now a hotspot for ghosts and vampire tours. Legend says that once the girls moved in, the nuns freaked out over the caskets and locked them in the attic. Then they sealed the attic windows with nails that were blessed by the Pope. People started reporting strange things, eerie shadows moving at night, mysterious figures lurking near the convent, and a spike in illnesses. The locals were like, yep, they're definitely vampires. And to this day, those attic windows are said to still be nailed shut. But what's the real story behind these women? Were they vampire brides or just poor girls trying to survive? New Orleans was not the vibrant party city it's known as today. In the 1700s, it was rough, disease-ridden, and on the edge of nowhere. The French were desperate to keep it alive. Without women, the population couldn't grow. So the casket girls were sent as part of a big plan to stabilize the colony and create families.
But the men thought they were too ugly.
But here's the thing. These girls had no idea what they were getting into. They were mostly teenagers, plucked from orphanages or poor families with a promise of a better life. The journey to New Orleans was a nightmare. Imagine being trapped on a ship for months below deck with barely any ventilation, surrounded by the stench of sickness. A lot of them fell ill. Some of them didn't survive the trip. Oh, and to make things worse, the women were often at the mercy of the male crew members.
Of course.
Even though the nuns were supposed to protect them, harassment and exploitation were constant threats. By the time they made it to New Orleans, they were already physically and emotionally wrecked. And what do they walk into? A mosquito-infested swamp filled with rough, dirty men who probably hadn't showered in months. The casket girls were housed at the Ursuline convent, where they were taught basic domestic skills, cooking, sewing, all the stuff to prepare them for marriage. But life in the convent wasn't luxurious. The place was overcrowded and underfunded, and the women were often living in really rough conditions. So let's talk about these marriages for a second. This was not some romantic happily ever after. The women were basically auctioned off to whichever guy the colony deemed needed a wife the most. They were married off to soldiers, trappers, or worse, ex-convicts. Many of these relationships were incredibly abusive, and the women had no choice but to suck it up and survive. They're literally across the world. But survival in New Orleans wasn't easy. Disease was everywhere. Malaria, yellow fever, you name it. A lot of the women lost children or fell ill themselves. They were expected to work hard, raise families, and keep their homes running, all while dealing with the constant threat of sickness and death. And on top of all of that, they were living in a deeply patriarchal society where they had no rights at all. So, sure, the vampire lore is fun and spooky and makes for a great story to tell in a ghost tour. But the real story of the casket girls is a story of resilience. These women endured unimaginable hardships, from the terrifying journey across the Atlantic. So after everything they went through, if these women did in fact turn into vampires and decide to hunt and kill and drink the blood of the men in the city, I wouldn't blame them. They had the worst life in France, the worst trip to America, the worst life in America. I mean, they literally struggled. And then on top of it, the men here claimed they were vampires. And then now they've been cemented in history as these vampire women, when really they were full-on survivors.
What's crazy is these men had no women. There's finally some women there, and they're all desperate, and they're like, ew.
They're like, nah, I'm good. Actually, they're blood-sucking vampires.
We wanted some women, but not those.
So it's really interesting. There are a lot of people in New Orleans who can trace their lineage back to the casket girls.
Wow.
And I find that really cool because I would say if I was a descendant of a casket girl, I would feel very honored because these women were not me, not today survivors. They really were. They came here to America and they had children and they lived through these horrible circumstances. And yes, I'm sure their life was so hard. But I mean, after everything they've been through, it's really interesting that people can track their lineage back to them. You guys already know because we have been talking about them for a while now. VIIA Hemp is by far one of our favorite sponsors we've ever had, okay? We use their products all the time. Maybe you're a little like me. You're a little anxious. You have a hard time settling down. You're kind of wound up a lot. If that's you, VIIA Hemp products are for you. Check out their website. You will find something that speaks to you. Maybe you're like Russ. You have a hard time sleeping because you have bad nerve pain or chronic pain. Then VIIA Hemp is for you because their gummies will help you get some quality sleep. Maybe you're looking to have a really good time. Maybe you just really like edibles. You want to laugh. You want to get the munchies. You want to watch a movie and have a really strong belly laugh. Then VIIA Hemp products are for you, okay? They're literally for everybody. So head over to VIIAHemp.com, promo code wifeofcrime1 to get 15% off your first order. That's VIIAHEMP.com, wifeofcrime1 for 15% off your first order. Last year, Save More Money was the most popular New Year's resolution in America. Clearly, a lot of us feel like our money is slipping through our fingers. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm not the best saver, and I don't know much about investing until I started saving and investing with Acorns. Turns out you don't have to be an expert at all because Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that fits you and your money goals. And I always thought that when people say, ooh, I invest in stocks, that they had a ton of money or something. Well, you don't need to be rich. Acorns lets you invest with the spare money you've got right now. You can literally start with $5. And you know you guys are spending that at Starbucks on these fancy lattes. So skip the coffee and invest with Acorns. You don't even need a ton of time. Like you can just sign up and start investing within 5 minutes. Head over to acorns.com/wifeofcrime or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. That's acorns.com/wifeofcrime. So fast forward to the winter of 1892 in Exeter, Rhode Island, and a small grieving community is convinced that a young woman who recently died has risen from the grave. Not to haunt them, but to drain the life of her own family. What would you do if everyone around you believed that the dead could rise and the only way to stop them was to dig up the body and burn its heart?
I would laugh at them.
Well,
I'm like, you motherfuckers are crazy.
Well, this is the story of Mercy Brown, the girl who became known as America's last vampire, and the dark folklore that pushed an entire town to take things way too far. So it's the late 1800s in rural Rhode Island, and we're talking about tiny towns, creepy cemeteries, and families being ravaged by tuberculosis. But back then they called it consumption.
Oh.
So this is the story of Mercy Brown and the Brown family of Exeter. Mercy Brown is a name that became infamous in American vampire lore. It's 1883, and Mary Eliza Brown, the mom of the family, is the first to go. She dies of tuberculosis. 3 years later, the Browns' eldest daughter, Mary Olive, dies of the same disease. And the thing about tuberculosis is it's like this slow, wasting illness. And you die like a slow death.
Is it treatable nowadays?
Yeah, now we have TB vaccinations.
Well, I guess you could live through anything if magic made it, in the words of Kanye.
That's true. Magic.
He was the first one to beat AIDS.
Yeah,
he was the first one to get fat while he got it. Everyone's like, wait, he's getting fatter?
It's true. So this family is being ravaged by this disease, and one by one, they're slowly dying. And this disease creeps through families because these people don't understand how disease spreads. So one person in the family gets it, then the next person gets it. And it seems to, it happens a lot all over 19th century New England.
Is it airborne?
Yes, TB is airborne.
Okay.
Yeah. So George Brown, the father, he's trying to keep it together. But one by one, all of his family members keep getting sick. And things are about to get super weird. The next one to get sick is the youngest daughter, Mercy. She's only 19. And by January 1892, she dies.
Dang.
That's 3 Browns claimed by tuberculosis in under a decade. And if you thought George's luck get any worse, you'd be wrong. Because not long after Mercy's death, his only son, Edwin, starts coughing. And that's the first sign of tuberculosis.
Is Edwin a little kid?
Yeah, he's younger. Yep. So the locals in Exeter start to murmur. And there's all these rumors.
Murmur.
There's all these rumors.
I'm thinking of like South Park when they're like, rubble, 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 rubble.
They start to gossip and start all these rumors about how this must be happening because there's a vampire. But this isn't the Hollywood version of vampires. Back then, people were terrified of them. No sexy bloodsuckers here. Folks believed that sometimes when someone died of tuberculosis, they didn't actually stay dead. They thought these undead family members might be rising from the grave to suck the life force out of the living. And there's one thing the Exeter community was convinced of. It's that something supernatural was behind the Brown family's misfortune.
There's been so many stupid people throughout history.
Well, they just weren't educated on this because we didn't have advances in science.
Yeah, but same thing. I mean, you go on the internet today with a lot of these conspiracy theories. I mean, a lot of the conspiracy theories have been true too, but
yeah,
you could go on there and people are just so dumb, even if they have the truth right in front of them. But then, good thing there are dumb people, because how would I know I'm smart? If there were no dumb people, I would be average.
Yeah, okay. So desperate to save Edwin, George finally caves to the pressure of the community and agrees to dig up the bodies of his wife and daughters.
I would hit them in the head with a shovel.
You can almost picture it. It's a cold March day in 1892. George's neighbors and a local doctor gather at the cemetery with shovels, and they start digging up these graves.
And to dig a hole is really hard to do.
Yeah. So Mary Eliza and Mary Olive, they've been buried for years. So when they get exhumed, they have decay. They're pretty decayed at this point.
Obviously.
But Mercy's only been dead for 2 months. And her body was kept in a stone crypt through the freezing winter. So when they opened her coffin, they found her looking suspiciously well preserved. You can imagine everyone was looking at her like, oh my God, like she doesn't even look dead. She's not decaying. But it's because she was in this, frozen.
Yeah, like you freeze.
Stone.
Like if you freeze your food, it stays good. I don't mean to call her food, but you know what I mean.
There was still blood in her heart and liver. To the scientifically untrained eyes of 19th century Rhode Island, this was proof. This was the only proof they needed that Mercy was a vampire, draining the life of her poor brother Edwin. But of course, it couldn't stop there. These townspeople had a solution that's straight out of a horror story. They removed Mercy's heart from her body and burned it. They mixed the ashes into a tonic and made Edwin drink it.
Oh my God, this is like the beginning of the QAnon people.
This actually happened in real life.
People are so stupid.
Unfortunately for Edwin, the whole vampire cure didn't work, and he passed away a couple months later. And sadly for the father, George, his entire family is now dead. And he's completely alone. But the tale of Mercy Brown didn't die with him. The story has some serious staying power. Today we know that Mercy's well-preserved state was due to the cold weather, not the dark arts. And the blood in her organs, totally normal for a body that's been refrigerated in a crypt for 2 months to still have blood in its organs. But back then, they didn't understand all of this. So people turned to the only explanations they had: superstition and folklore. What's wild is that Mercy Brown's story might have even influenced Bram Stoker's writing of Dracula.
Today, I bet they go to sleep in a coffin. Maybe it comes from that. She was sleeping in her coffin, and she came out looking how she looked.
Yeah, so the story of Dracula was partially inspired by this story too. Today, Mercy's grave at Chestnut Hill Cemetery draws visitors, paranormal enthusiasts from all over. People are captivated by this blend of history, folklore, and pure fear of the unknown. The story of Mercy Brown is more than just a tale of vampires. It's a reminder of how, in times of crisis, fear and superstition can take hold. So next time you hear about America's last vampire, remember that it's not just about blood and fangs. It's about very real humans' need to find meaning in the face of death. And that's what makes Mercy Brown's story unforgettable.
I think what I'll think about now when I think about vampires is how stupid people are.
Vampire legends have long held a grip on human imagination, evolving from terrifying folklore to the cornerstone of modern horror fiction. But these myths are generally enjoyed as harmless entertainment like we do. There are instances when the boundary between fiction and reality become dangerously blurred. One of the most extreme and tragic examples of this occurred in the 1990s with the infamous Kentucky vampire cult, led by Rod Ferrell. This case shows us how an obsession with vampire myths can spiral out of control and lead to violence and tragedy.
There was this girl when I was growing up in my neighborhood. She would her and her boyfriend would pretend they were vampires, and they'd wear fake teeth. And I'm like, these stupid dummies probably biting each other and stuff.
Probably.
Yeah.
Well, in the mid-1990s, Rod Ferrell, just a 16-year-old kid, convinced himself and others that he was no ordinary teenager. Ferrell believed he was Visago, a 500-year-old vampire. A persona he created to match his growing obsession with immortality and power. But this wasn't some harmless goth phase or a teen fascination with the macabre. Ferrell's delusions ran deeper, and as it festered, it attracted others to join him in what would become known as the Kentucky Vampire Clan. These kids believed they were more than human, and they backed up those beliefs with dark rituals, bloodletting, and a dangerous sense of detachment from reality. This isn't just another story of teenage rebellion or harmless goth fantasies. No, this story takes us deep into the depths of delusion. It's the 1990s in America, the era of grunge music, dial-up internet, and the satanic panic. There were a lot of teens at this time that had a fascination with the macabre. For Rod Ferrell, a 16-year-old from Kentucky, that fascination wasn't just skin deep. Ferrell didn't just like vampires. He believed he was one. And like I said, he called himself Visago.
This definitely reminds me of What We Do in the Shadows.
It does, except it gets really bad.
This is why you shouldn't pick on people, folks, because then they turn into vampires.
Well, Ferrell convinced...
Be nice to the weird kids at school.
I agree. Yeah, be nice to these kids.
Yeah, so what if they were in Jenko jeans and they're played out? Just still be like, what's up, dude? I'll play a little hacky sack with you or something.
I don't think any kids, maybe they do now, but that was so 90s reference and early 2000s reference of you, Jenko jeans and hacky sack.
Well, that's what they used to do when I was a kid. They would have on their Jenko jeans and they would play hacky sack.
Yeah.
And they would stand in a circle, and obviously they all smoked cigarettes because that was so cool.
Yeah, they did. Well, Farrell convinced 4 other teenagers that they too were part of something bigger, something supernatural. This wasn't just a game of pretend, like dressing up for Halloween or watching too many vampire movies. This was the beginning of a deadly spiral. A group of kids who believed they were more than just human fed their delusions with dark rituals.
No, they're going to kill animals. I could feel it.
So Rod did kill animals,
Piece of
but
shit.
not the other kids, only Rod. How does someone go from being a typical teenager to a self-proclaimed vampire? To understand that, we need to take a closer look at Rod's troubled past. Rod Farrell didn't come from a stable home. His childhood was marked with neglect, abuse, and a desperate search for identity. His mother, Sandra, was an emotionally unstable woman with her own strange fascination with the occult and dark fantasy. She struggled with the demons of her own past, leaving Rod to navigate the world full of pain and uncertainty. When Rod was just a boy, he and his mother found themselves homeless after escaping an abusive father. They moved in with Sandra's parents, but that only brought more trauma. Rod's grandfather had a dark secret. He was a child molester. And Rod became his next victim. For years, Rod endured this abuse. And when his mother finally found out, they left, which is good on her for leaving, but life didn't get any better. Sandra turned to prostitution to survive, and their home became a revolving door of random men. With no stable parental figure, Rod's childhood was completely chaotic. It was around this time that Chandra and Rod began playing this role-playing game together called Vampire the Masquerade. It's like Dungeons and Dragons, but for vampires.
It's like a real game or they made it up?
No, it's a real game. It was like really popular in the 80s and 90s, like Dungeons and Dragons was.
So
but
that's like
it was a vampire game.
Like if you were playing a Batman game, you think you're really Batman.
Exactly. So this game became the seed of Rod's growing obsession with vampire mythology. For him, it wasn't just a game. It was the beginning of something far darker, a gateway to creating a new, powerful identity. Rod wasn't just playing anymore. He became fully immersed in this vampire fantasy, convinced he was this ancient, immortal being. His belief wasn't just something he kept in his head. Rod lived it. He would hang upside down in his bedroom like a bat.
What kind of clothes did he wear?
I mean, he was like a goth kid.
Did he wear like red velvet jackets?
No, he was like gothic. He wore black hair.
So he had the wallet with the chain.
Probably
like a spiked choker on his neck.
Probably, yeah. I mean, listen, no judgment, because I hung out with those kids when I was younger. So I don't have any judgment, but this kid took it way too far.
Well, I like to judge people because it's funny sometimes. And if we wear something, like if I had friends, I would have made fun of them if they were wearing that.
Well, he convinced himself that drinking blood would give him power. It wasn't about dressing up in black or being part of goth subculture, listening to heavy metal or punk rock. This was a delusion that went straight to his core. Rod didn't stay alone in this delusion for long. He got a small group of teens who shared his love of vampires, and he convinced them that they too could achieve immortality by joining his vampire cult. Together, they performed initiation rituals, drank each other's blood, and began plotting their escape from Kentucky. Where would a group of self-proclaimed vampires feel most at home?
Transylvania.
No. New Orleans.
Oh, wait, is Transylvania a real place?
It is, yes.
Huh.
Transylvania is a real place. But before they could make their way to Louisiana, the plan took a horrifying turn. Rod, along with his followers, made a pit stop in Florida. Their goal was to steal a car from one of the Klan members' parents. Her name was Heather Wendorf.
Why didn't they just turn to bats and fly where they had to go?
I know, why not?
They're frauds.
Heather's parents had a car, and the group needed it to fuel their escape to New Orleans without being tracked. On the night of November 25th, 1996, Rod Farrell walked into the Wendorf home with a crowbar in hand, and with brutality, he bludgeoned Heather's parents to death, Richard and Ruth Wendorf. The scene was savage. and horrific. These weren't just murders. They were a violent manifestation of Rod's twisted vampire fantasy. After the killings, Rod and his clan fled, but it didn't take long for police to catch up. And when they did, Rod showed no remorse. None. In fact, he clung to his delusions even tighter, telling anyone who would listen that these murders were part of his vampire awakening. Can you imagine? He just murdered these two innocent people, and he's doubling down on this. He truly believed that he really believed these delusions.
People are so stupid. And right now, I just looked him up. He's only 44 years old. It's not like he's super old now or anything.
He's not. And he's in a lot of interviews talking about this. At this point, he is remorseful because he's been in prison and he's serving a life sentence. But he talks about his mind state back then and that he was completely delusional.
I don't believe a lot of these people are remorseful. I believe that they're sorry that they got caught. Because had they not got caught, they just have been doing whatever they want.
That's true. Well, his trial was a media circus with headlines everywhere, branding him the leader of the vampire cult.
Wait, so they caught him right away?
Yeah, the police caught up with the kids pretty much right away. Because the girl Heather, her sister, came home and found both of her parents dead. Can you imagine walking into that scene?
I can't.
It's horrible.
I can't even imagine it.
But the world watched with a morbid fascination as this teenage boy claimed to be this immortal creature. In 1998, Rod Ferrell was sentenced to death for the murders.
Good.
But his sentence was later reduced to life because of his age. The other members of the group received lesser sentences, but Rod remained the central figure in this super notorious case of the 1990s.
I understand them getting less time because they didn't actually commit it, but they still should get in trouble and do a lot of time, especially whoever's parents it was.
She got zero time.
What?
Heather Wendorf got zero time.
But she led them there to her parents to kill them.
So during the interrogations, right, there was this back and forth where Heather claimed that she just told Rod where the keys were and to go steal the car and had no idea that he was going to murder her parents. Rod claimed that Heather asked him, or they had spoken about murdering her parents. One of the other girls in the group backed Heather up and said no, she had no idea that her parents were going to get murdered. So it's like, we will never know if she knew or didn't know that these murders were going to happen.
Wow.
But that's why she got zero time.
I don't know how to feel.
I know. It's conflicting. I mean, I think that it's hard. If she's telling the truth and she really thought they were just going there to steal her car, she should have gotten some type of consequence, but she didn't know they would be murdered. But according to Rod, she knew full on that they were going to be murdered.
Whatever happened to like accomplice to murders and stuff? Like he wouldn't be in that house if it wasn't for you.
That's true. Yeah. But what makes this case so terrifying isn't just the crime itself. It's how easily the line between fantasy and reality was crossed. For Rod Ferrell, the vampire myth wasn't just a story. It was a way of life. It was a means to escape the harsh realities of his past and his pain and his fractured identity. Instead of finding power or solace in that fantasy, he found violence and destruction. Vampires have always represented something seductive: power, immortality, and the freedom to live outside of societal norms. But when those myths are romanticized, they can take root in these vulnerable minds and turn into something way more dangerous. Rod Ferrell's story is a chilling reminder of how, for some, the line between myth and reality isn't as clear as we'd like to think. And sometimes, when we step too far into the darkness, we may not be able to find our way back. So the next time you sit down to watch a vampire movie or get lost in the story of supernatural, remember, most of us know where to draw the line. But for a few, like Rod Ferrell, the line doesn't just blur, it disappears completely.
I think that people are more likely to do weird stuff like this if they've never been punched in the face.
We have said that many times.
Like, you're going to do some weird shit because you haven't got any consequences in your life. Like,
I mean, in this...
like, I'm going to bite you. Pow! Right in your face. Like, never mind.
In this case, though, this kid was severely abused.
Yes.
He was severely abused. I'm sure he was punched. He was also molested for years and years. I really believe that he tried to escape his past with this whole narrative in his head of being a vampire. It was like a defense mechanism, but then it went way too far. Like, it became a full-on delusion for him.
Yeah, I could see that.
I'm not making an excuse. Don't get me wrong. I'm not making an excuse.
I will never let anyone's past be an excuse. Like, oh, well, what happened to him here? What happened to him here? Now, what he went through was very bad, but going through a bad situation allows you to actually triumph and win in, like, a great way. Like, look what I've been through and look where I am now.
No, 100%.
So, like, it gives you a chance to have greater victories because you've come from further down.
Absolutely.
It's an opportunity to, like, rise up and beat the whatever word I was looking for.
No, I completely agree with you. I don't think it's an excuse for his behavior, but I do think that some people are psychologically more weak than other people.
Well, that's true.
And I think that he needed some type of escape from the horrible reality of his life, but it, like, went way too far in his head.
Sometimes what it comes down to being a good person is sometimes you just got to do shit you don't want to do.
Yep.
You just do it.
Yep. So these stories are cautionary tales. They show us that when we let myth and reality blur, when we allow superstition, obsession, or a twisted need for escape to take over, the results can be deadly. Vampires have always represented the forbidden, the allure of immortality, or power beyond death. But when these legends sink their teeth into fragile minds...
Sink their teeth.
Did you like that?
Yeah.
Things can go very wrong. So the next time you hear a vampire tale, maybe ask yourself, why are we so drawn to them? What part of us craves danger and defiance of death? And where do we draw the line between fantasy and reality? Because if we've learned anything from the Casket Girls, Mercy Brown, and Rod Farrell's Kentucky Vampire Cult, it's that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones we read about. They're the ones created when a belief goes too far.
So I think the moral of this story is, if someone tells you they're a vampire, just punch them in the face.
Okay.
That's it. You'd be all right, probably, because they're probably like, ow.
Or if someone claims you're a vampire, punch him in the face. Because that's what happened with the other two stories.
I feel like everyone's life was hard back then.
It's true,
like,
yeah.
There wasn't a lot of clean water.
No, life sucked.
They didn't have a TV. What you gonna do when you're bored? They didn't have a refrigerator.
Thank God we live now, honestly.
Like, we live in a time where, like, I was listening to something, and poor people now live better than rich people lived back then.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, like, they would be like, they were talking, would you rather be a rich person in a castle back then, or would you rather be a poor person now? For people that know how life was back then.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, no, now, like, you have climate control, you have TVs. The poorest people have smartphones.
Yeah.
Like, so, like, most people have these luxuries.
Yeah, we definitely take it for
we have
granted.
medicine, so we could, people were dying in the 30s and 40s back then.
Yeah, they were dying so young. It's true. We have, thank God for the invention of antibiotics. Like,
yeah, some people are living too long now. They're like a waste of air and stuff.
Don't say that.
There are some.
Like who?
Well, even bad people live long.
Yeah, bad people do live too long. We have serial killers living, still alive on death row, hanging out. So it is true. But a lot of good people live a long time too. So I love vampires. I love witches. And I thought it would be really cool to talk about vampires and like history of vampire lore, and then talk about how it's taken too far. And,
I I'm curious if anyone else watches What We Do in the Dark. Wait, is that what it's really called?
What We Do in the Shadows.
What We Do in the Shadows.
Yeah.
I wonder if anybody else watched that. So it's very silly.
If you haven't watched it, you should.
If you're the type of person that takes yourself too seriously, you won't like it.
Yeah, you have to be goofy. Wait a second.
Uh-oh.
I have something to say, and I should have brought this up in the beginning. Everybody, I want to make an announcement that last night, while we were watching What We Do in the Shadows, Russ said something profound. What was it, Russ?
I admitted, this is probably for the beginning, but I admitted that you are funny because I was watching one of my favorite shows, Kill Tony, which I hate and love at the same time.
Yes.
And I was watching this lady up there that was so unfunny. And in my head, because I was eating one of the VIIA edibles.
Oh yeah, he had had an edible.
What's the code for VIIA if they want to get some?
Wife of Crime #1.
Yeah, they'll give you a good discount over there. Go and definitely do that because then they know like our listeners will, listen. So I was watching this lady. She was terrible. The jokes were so stupid. And then I was like, Jess is funnier than her. So I was comparing Jess to the least funny person I ever watched.
Whatever.
And I was like, Jess, you know what? You are funny.
Yes. And it made me so happy. It made me feel so warm inside and happy that he finally admitted it. And now you've admitted it on the podcast for hundreds of thousands of people to know.
Because you've gotten funnier.
Okay, but
like you used to not be funny at all because you're very worried about people's feelings so much. So when you stop worrying about people's feelings, then you could be funny.
Okay, well, at least you finally admitted I'm funny. So thank you very much.
The only person's feelings she doesn't care about is mine. She will shit on me at the drop of a dime.
All right, everybody. Well, happy Halloween. Check us out on Instagram at Wife of Crime Pod and Facebook at Wife of Crime The Crime Family and Patreon at Wife of Crime Pod. And just FYI, 2 things. If you sign up for the Apple subscription, it is not ad-free. It is only for our bonus content, #1. #2, we don't get a list of names, so we can't give you a shout out. Because we don't get a list of names. Apple manages all of it, and all I know is how many people have signed up. So just wanted to make that announcement so everybody knows. But if you're looking for more content, you can go to Patreon or sign up at the Apple subscription for all of our backlog of True Crime and Chill episodes.
I would think there's got to be at least 50 episodes at this point.
I think more than that.
Well, that's why I said at least. That means that's the lowest number.
Maybe 50.
But God forbid if I said 50 and there was 49. So I'm like, I want a refund. And I'm like, shut up, stupid.
All right, well, let's go watch the Knicks and then a vampire movie.
I'll catch y'all next time.
All right, bye.
Peace.